Samurai Nippon. How two guns changed Japan.
Just 2 guns erased 300 years of samurai warfare in a mere 50 years. This is the story of the most dramatic technological revolution in history. And it all began by chance. August 25, 1543, Tanegashima Island. The fire-spitting tubes brought by Portuguese merchants put an end to the era of swords and bows. It was the moment Japan's destiny changed.
But first, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. This helps the algorithm show you more videos perfectly suited to your interests.
Chapter 1, 1543. The day Japan met gunpowder.
1543, Japan was in the midst of the Warring States period. Over 200 feudal lords occupied territories nationwide, each vying for supremacy. Date in the north, Takeda in the east, Uesugi and Hokuriku. Mori in the Chugoku region, Shimazu in Kyushu, and in the capital region, Oda Nobunaga was beginning to rise to prominence. Warfare in this era was entirely about individual skill. Samurai fought with swords and bows, announcing their names and engaging in single combat. This had been the code of battle for hundreds of years. On the battlefield, you first shouted your name and lineage to the enemy. I am retainer of the house. Then you fought one-on-one. This was samurai pride. Victory on the battlefield was determined by individual valor, a general's strength, the quality of his retainer. Course and morale, these were everything. Even with superior numbers, the weak would lose. Even outnumbered, the strong would win. That was the common sense of the warring states. The bow and arrow was the strongest projectile weapon of the time. However, mastering it required an almost unimaginable amount of time, 10 years of training. To shoot accurately, you first built core strength, then learned breathing techniques and shot thousands of arrows. You needed the skill to make arrows and the muscle strength to handle the bow. That's how long it took to become a full-fledged archer. Moreover, the effective range of a bow was limited to 50 meters. Beyond that, its power dropped significantly. Piercing armor was extremely difficult. Bows were powerful, but they had limits. In other words, samurai could only demonstrate their power on the battlefield. Through years of training and experience, that's why samurai were a privileged class. However, this common sense was about to be destroyed by a single weapon. August 25, 1543, Tanegashima Island, Kagoshima Prefecture. A Portuguese ship drifted ashore on this small island. The ship had been caught in a typhoon and was in terrible condition. Sails torn, masts broken, hull cracked. 2 Portuguese men were aboard, the merchant Francisco Zeimoto and his companion. Exhausted, without food, they had reached the island simply to survive. The island's lord, Tanegashima Tokitaka, then 42 years old, he was curious by nature and favored new things. A progressive lord with strong interest in Western goods, actively seeking to adopt them. Tokitaka generously protected them, and he was captivated by something the Portuguese had brought. It was a gleaming black tube unlike anything he'd seen before. It was a matchlock gun.
Chapter 2. The first shot that shattered samurai common sense.
What is this? Tokitaka asked the Portuguese through an interpreter. There was a Chinese interpreter on the island who translated Portuguese to Chinese and Chinese to Japanese. Portuguese Francisco answered, "This is a gun, called an arquebus. It fires lead bullets using gunpowder." Tokitaka was skeptical. Fire propels lead? What is gunpowder? Impossible. His mind struggled between common sense and the unbelievable. His retainers felt the same. My lord, such a suspicious weapon. Could this be Western sorcery? The retainers voiced their suspicions one after another. But in the next moment, Tokitaka's common sense shattered with a sound. Francisco aimed the matchlock gun, lit the match, and pulled the trigger. Bang! A thunderous roar shook the island. Birds across the island took flight simultaneously. The sound was like thunder, something no one had ever heard before. A board placed 100 meters away shattered like paper. Tokitaka was speechless. All the retainers around him stood frozen with mouths agape. What? Tokitaka finally squeezed out words. So this is the power of gunpowder. With a bow, even a skilled archer's limit was 50 meters. Moreover, arrows were easily affected by wind and piercing. Armor was extremely difficult. But this gun was different. Tokitaka wanted to verify. Could it really pierce iron armor? He ordered his retainers to set up an iron plate 100 meters away. He had it fired again. Bang! A fist-sized hole opened in the iron plate. It penetrated like paper. The retainers were speechless. Tokitaka made an instant decision. "I will acquire this weapon. I'll pay any price." He offered the Portuguese an extraordinary price, 2,000 Rio in gold. In today's value, an astronomical sum of approximately 200 million yen per gun, more than half of the Tanegashima domain's annual income. The Portuguese were surprised. They hadn't expected this small island lord in the Far East could produce such a large sum immediately. They gladly sold the 2 guns. Once Tokitaka acquired the 2 guns, he summoned the island's finest swordsmith, Yaita Kinbei. Kinbei was 50 years old at the time, known as the most skilled craftsman on Tanegashima, and a master of Japanese sword-making. "Kinbei, can you make this gun?" Tokitaka asked directly. Kinbei picked up the Matchlock gun and observed it carefully. Then he spent an entire night disassembling it. Barrel, mechanism, trigger, match holder, screws, springs. He carefully examined each component. As a craftsman, Kinbei was impressed by the intricate mechanism, magnificent workmanship. But there was one part Kinbei absolutely couldn't understand or make: the screw.
Chapter 3. The impossible screw, how Japan reverse-engineered the gun.
In 16th century Japan, the concept of a screw did not exist. There were nails and wedges, but no one had seen a component that rotated in a spiral to fasten things. Kinbei made repeated prototypes, heating iron, hammering it, carving grooves, but he couldn't get the thread right. The male and female threads wouldn't mesh. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, only time passed. Kinbei committed himself to the task with his pride as a craftsman, but he couldn't make the screw alone. Even at night, unable to sleep, Kinbei continued thinking how to cut spiral grooves, how to mesh male and female threads. But no answer came. Tokitaka was troubled. At this rate, the guns he had acquired would remain limited to just 2. So he made a bold decision. That decision was to wed his daughter, Wakasa, to a Portuguese man. In those days, marrying a foreigner was unthinkable in Japan. The purpose was singular: to learn how to make screws over time. As Wakasa lived with the Portuguese, she would steal the technique and relay it to Kinbei. That was the plan. Wakasa obeyed her father's orders. She was 16 years old. Foreign land, foreign language, foreign culture, everything was unknown. But for Tanegashima's future, she accepted this sacrifice. She lived with the Portuguese for 1 year, learning gunsmithing, and she uncovered the secret of the screw. To make screws, you first needed tools called taps and dies. A tap cuts internal threads, a die cuts external threads. Wakasa relayed this information to Kinbei. Kinbei spent a year making taps and dies himself. And finally, 1544, Tenbun 13, exactly 1 year after Matchlock guns were introduced to Tanegashima, Kinbei finally completed a domestically produced Matchlock gun. The completed gun's performance was comparable to the Portuguese original. It was a moment proving the excellence of Japanese craftsmanship. Tokitaka test-fired it. Bang! The board 100 meters away shattered. We did it. We can make guns too. The Matchlock guns born in Tanegashima, called Tanegashima guns, spread rapidly throughout Japan. First Kyushu, then the Chugoku region, and finally the capital region. Why did they spread so quickly? There were 3 reasons. First, the explosive demand from feudal lords. With guns, even peasants could defeat. Samurai-this was the democratization of warfare. Regardless of status, anyone could defeat an enemy by pulling a trigger. Second, the excellence of Japanese craftsmanship. Swordsmiths understood the structure of Matchlock, guns, and established mass production in just a few years. The techniques for making Japanese swords could be directly applied to making gun barrels. Third, the era of demand that was the warring states. Everyone sought new weapons to survive, life and death uncertain. That's why guns sold. From just 2 guns in 1543, by 1575, mere 32 years later, there were said to be 500,000 guns throughout Japan. This was an astonishing speed. In modern terms, like the iPhone spreading worldwide in 2 years, that's how shocking it was.
Chapter 4. The Battle of Nagashino. 3,000 guns that changed warfare forever.
Then, May 21st, 1575. The battle that completely changed Japanese tactics with Matchlock guns, the Battle of Nagashino. Location: Nagashino Castle in Mikawa Province, present-day Shinshiro City, Aichi Prefecture. Takeda Katsuyori's force of 15,000. At its core was Takeda's cavalry, the elite unit called Akazone Red Corps. They had been undefeated since the era of his father, Takeda Shingen. Red armor, red banners, red horse gear, the cavalry unified entirely in red was the most feared presence on the battlefield. When it was heard that the Red Corps is coming, enemies fled without fighting. The secret of the Takeda cavalry's strength was speed and impact force. Once they charged, they would break through enemy lines in one fell swoop. No one had been able to stop them until then. Opposing them was the Oda Nobunaga Tokugawa Ieyasu alliance of 38,000. Though superior in numbers, they were helpless before Takeda's cavalry, so everyone thought. But Nobunaga had a secret strategy: 3,000 guns. He had bought up guns from across the country, gathered gunsmiths, and prepared for this day over a long time. Nobunaga's tactics were simple. Arrange gunners in 3 rows. When the first row fires, they move back and the second row fires. When the second row fires, the third row fires, and by then the first row has finished reloading. Repeat this process, 3-stage volley fire. 6 a.m. The morning mist began to clear. Takeda Katsuyori ordered a full charge. Attack! With that voice, 15,000 troops began moving. The ground rumbled across the battlefield. The earth shook, grass and trees rustled. The sight was as powerful as if the earth itself were splitting. Oda Tokugawa's soldiers trembled. Who could stop this cavalry charge? 200 meters, 150 meters, 100 meters, the cavalry approaches. At that moment, Nobunaga gave the order, "Fire!" Bang, bang, bang. 3,000 bullets assaulted the Takeda army. The first row of gunners fired simultaneously. The front row of cavalry fell one after another. Horses screamed, warriors fell to the ground. But the Takeda army didn't falter. The following troops continued their charge, but the second row fires. Bang, bang, bang. Again, the front row falls. Then the third row, bang, bang, bang. The Takeda cavalry completely stopped 50 meters before the barricades, unable to advance. Fallen horses and warriors blocked the way. Takeda Katsuyori lost 10,000 troops in this battle. Among them were senior retainers from his father Shingen's era. Famous generals like Yamagata Masakage, Baba Nobuharu, and Naito Masatoyo fell one after another. The Takeda clan, called the strongest in the warring states, began to decline from this day. 7 years later, the Takeda clan was destroyed. Guns completely changed the common sense of warfare. Individual valor no longer mattered. Before gunpowder and lead, samurai pride was powerless.
Chapter 5. How Guns Reshaped Japan. Warfare, Castles, Economy, and Class.
The introduction of firearms was not merely a weapons innovation. It changed Japanese society itself. Politics, economy, culture, class structure, everything changed. First, tactical changes. From individual skill to collective warfare. Using guns required a disciplined army. It became an age when not individual heroes, but organized groups won. Announcing names and engaging in single combat, such beautiful warfare, disappeared. Instead, mechanical warfare began, where everyone fired at once on a single command. Gunner corps required everyone to move the same way. Not individual judgment, but following commanders' orders. This was the beginning of modern military forces. Second, castle structures changed. To counter gun range, castle walls became higher and moats deeper. Castles were no longer mere residences, but fortresses. Himeji Castle, Osaka Castle, Edo Castle, all these massive castle structures were built in the age of guns. High stone walls were meant to block gun firing lines. Third, economic structure change. Saltpeter, the raw material for gunpowder, wasn't produced in Japan. It had to be imported from China and Portugal. To possess guns, overseas trade was essential. Therefore, port towns like Sakai, Hakata, and Nagasaki developed rapidly. Merchants built enormous wealth. The price of 1 ton of saltpeter was about 100 million yen in today's value. Feudal lords ventured into overseas trade seeking this saltpeter. Possessing guns was a symbol of wealth and power. And fourth, class system change. Even peasants could fight samurai if they held guns. This accelerated Gakokujo, overthrowing social superiors. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, though of peasant origin, he became ruler of all Japan. That was possible because of guns, a democratic weapon. Hideyoshi himself understood the importance of guns better than anyone. He maximized the use of gunner corps and achieved national unification. But ironically, after unifying the country, Hideyoshi implemented sword hunts, confiscating weapons from peasants. He kicked away the ladder he had climbed. Why? Guns were too powerful. Anyone could use them, which meant samurai privileges were threatened. If uprisings occurred, peasants could defeat samurai. Then in 1639, the Tokugawa shogunate decided on national isolation. It restricted imports of saltpeter, the raw material for gunpowder, and controlled gun production. The shogunate confiscated guns nationwide and made them subject to permits. Non-samurai couldn't possess guns. That's what the era became. Thus, despite being one of the world's leading gun-owning nations in the late 16th century, Japan returned to the age of swords in the 17th century. This was an extremely rare phenomenon in world history. But the changes brought by guns didn't disappear. Collective warfare, discipline, order, these were inherited into the Edo period and bloomed again during the Meiji Restoration. Two guns that drifted to Tanegashima in 1543. They may have been a time bomb that anticipated Japan 300 years later.
82 guns, 3 people, 1 nation transformed.
For 80 years since the introduction of firearms, the two Portuguese who washed ashore in Tanegashima that day changed Japan's future. They couldn't have known that the 2 guns they brought would change this nation's destiny. History is born from small coincidences, but it's always people who seize those coincidences, utilize them, and change the era. Tanegashima Tokitaka, Yaita Kinbei, Princess Wakasa, their decisions changed Japan. And that change continues today. The era we live in might also be changed by someone's decision.
With your likes and subscriptions, enter the samurai world you never knew. Let's explore the truth of history together. Please also share in the comments which Warring States warrior you'd like to know about next. Your request might become the next video. Samurai Nippon. See you next time.